Good morning, Michelle.
Good morning, Stephen.
We're coming up to the second anniversary of the Abbott Government's election to power, and you're reflecting on this in your column today. I think your central insight is that Tony Abbott is a fighter with an innate instinct for conflict. He's continued this approach from opposition into government, and it's defined his first 2 years. Is that what you're saying?
I think this has been one of his central problems, because when you go to government, you really do need to reset your style to some extent. Now, obviously, fights will continue and you don't completely transform or remove that instinct, but when the instinct for conflict becomes and stays dominant, then I think it makes governing more difficult, it makes it harder to strike the compromises that are necessary, and it does alienate the public, which is very jaded with the high level of aggression that we're seeing in politics these days.
Well, pick up an aspect of, I suppose, aggression. You say that the culture wars are at a new intensity, with the media wars a dominant subset. We've certainly seen criticism of the ABC from Tony Abbott, and at least from others in government, of the Fairfax press. From a purely tactical point of view, is attacking substantial sections of the media a prudent thing to do for a government that's in some electoral trouble?
I don't think it is a wise course. I think in particular the assault on the ABC, which has been carried to extremes, is very foolish from this government. I think it has amounted to bullying, and while it probably has made the ABC more cautious, nevertheless this is a well-respected institution. I perhaps should add the rider that I do some commentary for the ABC, so I should declare an interest, but leaving that aside, it is a widely respected institution within the community, and the government just looks to be going down a path that is attack for attack's sake.
And the ABC has a lot of support amongst Liberal voters.
Well, exactly, and certainly also among regional voters, because of course it provides a very extensive regional service which no other media outlet does. So you don't hear such criticism usually from National Party MPs, which is quite interesting.
After the February failed spill motion, the Prime Minister said that good government starts here. But 7 months on, the government doesn't seem to be in much a better position in the polls. The cabinet is leaking, and you quote one frontbencher as saying everything is pretty fractious. Assuming the truth of this, can they really limp towards the next election in this state?
The problem is they can't do much to rectify this state. I don't think that Tony Abbott's going to manage to somehow transform the situation. Certainly ministers are much more open in their leaking, if I can put it that way, and also sometimes in their public comments. And we've seen Erica Abetz, for example, slap down colleagues over same-sex marriage, saying, well, if they don't agree with the coalition's marriage policy, they should quit the front bench. And we've seen Malcolm Turnbull come out publicly on the citizenship legislation. All sorts of comments, private and public, show that the cabinet is divided on issues, and that's never a good look. And Tony Abbott reads Riot Act lectures from time to time. They have no effect. In general, also at a wider level, the government just doesn't seem to be able to get its policy agenda together, and we've seen this particularly on comments on tax reform, which are all over the place. Now, it's got a tax white paper coming, but in the meantime, it looks shambolic.
Well, we've got the Canning by-election approaching. They have, I think, an 11.8% margin. It's assumed that there will be a swing against the government, because there normally is in by-elections of this kind. If, for example, they were returned with, say, 8% margin, a scare but not a near-death experience, will every backbencher with a margin of less than 8% suddenly become very nervous?
I think that's a very interesting figure you've picked, Stephen, because it's sort of right in the middle, in the sense that the government can say, oh well, special circumstances, and it's a big swing, but it's not a lethal swing. The opposition can also spin it its way. How the backbench would react, the government backbench, I think is something of a question mark, but certainly it would just reinforce the nerves that are there at the moment. I spent a couple of days in Canning this week, and the interesting things to come out of that were that on both sides they expect the government to retain this seat. I spoke to a number of campaigners on the ground on each side. I didn't speak to anyone who said Labor's definitely going to win, or they were confident about that. So that's the expectation. The other interesting thing was that there was a lot of negative feedback coming, again on both sides, from the ground about Tony Abbott. People were reporting, Labor people were reporting, but Liberal people were also reporting that people in the community were really, really down on Tony Abbott.
Well, we'll talk again next week, and the Canning by-election will be closer then. I'm sure it'll come up again. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Stephen.